For 160 million years, the dinosaurs ruled the planet, from their humble progenitors in the Triassic to the tyrant lizard king of the late Cretaceous. Dinosauria was a clade unmatched in its domination. And then, 66 million years ago, that came to an abrupt and near total end. With the sole exception of aves, every clade of dinosaur went extinct. But what if they hadn't? Dragons of the Cenozoic follows the development of a world where the K-Pg event took place, but where a little bit of luck allowed a handful of species of non-avian dinosaurs to survive in a refugium in eastern Antarctica. This is the story of how the greatest dynasty the world has ever known recovered in a world it no longer ruled. Crack! Crack! The sound of scale, feather, and bone slamming and scraping against each other echoes through the seaside Nothofagus forest of this stretch of the Weddillian Isthmus as the two male Hoplophosphorus do battle. It is the earliest days of spring, and the mating season is in full swing for these hardy little Aquilohippoids. Backing away from each other, the competing males allow a long, bellowing hiss to escape their throats as they try and intimidate the other into surrender. Yet, filled with raging hormones, a fact they broadcast to the world with the bright red, fleshy scales under their eyes, neither male backs down. And so they come together again. With a crack, the armor plating of their necks slams together and begins to scrape like angry little tectonic plates. The little claws on their hands harmlessly scrape at their enemy's fluffy underside as they try and use any kind of leverage to help bring their opponent to the ground. The clash is like a mixture of those played out by monitor lizards and giraffes, though later more derived Aquilohippids will make those giraffe comparisons more clear. Crack! 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 The echoes ring out, and life in the surrounding forest continues at its normal pace, as the denizens attempt to ignore the bluster of the angry little Thyreophorans. It is spring, and with the yearly rebirth after 3 months of darkness, the denizens of the Nothofagus forest are filled with a liveliness that cannot be suppressed by the angry cries of battling males. In the trees, chittering chirps join the chorus of animal life as odd little birds screech and flutter about. Perched upon a twisting liana, its long woody tendrils embracing the trunk of a Nothofagus tree, a bright red bird plucks at hair-like mosses, which it will take back to its nest. Where the eudontic gnats like this Austeropteryx begin and the more basal Antarctolestoids like Antarctolestes ends is a matter of debate. Just 740,000 years after the K-Pg extinction, the eudontic gnats, thanatoavians, and serpopartiforms are nowhere near the clearly divided clades that they will become. However, what sets this little red bird and a half a dozen other species of its genus apart from its ancestors is their arboreality. The nest woven from the fibers plucked by this little red dragon will perch high above the ground, away from the hungry jaws of cousins 750,000 years removed, and nest raiders of a distinctly more mammalian variety. Below the hurrying Austeropteryx, a hunter is on the prowl. The second largest carnivore in the western Antarctic forests, Caenodracon quietly stalks its prey, the rodent-like Pseudomericatherium. Superficially, Caenodracon harkens back to the dromaeosaurs and troodontids it is distantly related to. However, it is considerably more lightweight an animal than similarly sized members of those extinct clades, topping out at just 5 or so kilos. With the battle cries of distant Hoplophosphorus echoing through the forest, the little mammal our basilisk is stalking fails to pick up on a potential misstep from the feathered dragon as it closes the distance. Paying no mind to the movement of underbrush as it digs up tender roots to feed upon. The little mammal is caught completely off guard when, after a brief burst of speed, the basilisk closes the distance between the two and delivers a powerful kick to its skull, temporarily stunning it before delivering a second kick to its sacrum. Unlike the first, which quickly retracted, this blow drives down and stays in place as the basilisk's sickle claw plunges into the mammal's flesh to anchor itself in place. A sharp squeal erupts from the little mammal's mouth as a pain shoots through its body, followed by another as the dragon drives its other foot down between the animal's shoulder blades and digs its second sickle claw into its flesh. The sound of squeals, squawks, and the beating of wings reverberates through the forest as the little mammal tries to free itself, and the little dragon tries to avoid a painful kick from one of the venomous spurs wielded by the mammal. Despite its rodent-like appearance, Pseudomericatherium is a non-therian mammal, more specifically a gondwanathere, and like the monotremes, it retains the venomous spurs of basal mammaliforms. While a venomous kick from its hind legs is unlikely to kill the basilisk, the cautious predator is not taking any chances. It will remain anchored to the little mammal's back, pinning it to the ground until exhaustion has weakened it, before it begins to eat its prey alive. Yet this strategy, while sound, has the negative effect of causing a ruckus, and the squeals of a dying animal always attract opportunists. As the basilisk finally prepares to eat its prey, a creature comes loping out of the underbrush. Looking a bit like a saber-toothed weasel, Sarcobelodon imperator, the flesh-spear-toothed emperor, leisurely approaches our basilisk. Despite its height and reach advantage, even the largest Canodrakon would be outweighed by this big female. Expanding its wings to inflate its size and unleashing a deep hiss, the little basilisk tries to dissuade the mammal from continuing its approach. But while the gesture causes some hesitancy in the predator's approach, it is countered by bubbling growls. As the two predators square off, they hiss and growl and occasionally swat at each other, trying to stay out of range of their opponent's strikes. Releasing its grip on the little mammal's back, the basilisk sends a half-hearted kick towards the Sarcobelodon's head and misses as the little predator retreats from the strike, only to rapidly close the gap with another lunge. Flapping its wings profusely, the basilisk tries to lift its prey, but the movement only causes it to lose its grip on the scruff of the Pseudomericathere's neck. And with that brief failure, the little mammal bolts for the underbrush, leaving the angry Sarcobelodon and Canodrakon to posture and hiss before our basilisk flies out of range of the saber-toothed weasel's reach and into a nearby monkey puzzle tree. Eventually, the angry Sarcobelodon departs, leaving our basilisk alone in his tree. For a time, he continues to sit in his perch, looking down at the ground as his Euodontognath cousins fly by. Though his genus retains its ancestral volant abilities, his ability to awkwardly take to the trees does not translate to him being able to bring down prey on the wing. So he must ignore his smaller cousins and eventually return to the forest floor to hunt. As he prepares to leap from his perch, he scans the clearing below once more, and then he spots it. It, in this case, being a small, vole-sized mammal scampering at the edge of the clearing below. The strange mammal's saber teeth are not convergently evolved with those of Sarcobelodon, but are instead homologous in origin. This little creature is Berashish rex, and like Sarcobelodon, it is a meridiolestid, more specifically a cronopioid. Unlike its larger predatorial cousin, Berashish is a small omnivore. a leftover disaster taxon that has remained virtually unchanged in the 750 years since the K-Pg. As the little saber-toothed, or perhaps tusked would be a more apt descriptor, mouse cautiously roots about, scanning its surroundings for danger, it fails to see our basilisk as he prepares to leap. Wings spread modestly, the tailed bird launches itself from the tree. It is not flying, merely falling with precision. Before the little mammal can respond to the sudden shadow overhead, a foot slams down upon it, cracking bones and rupturing organs as 5 kilos of angry bird grip it. The basilisk awkwardly tries to prevent itself from falling over while maintaining its position on the mammal before swinging back with its jaws and grabbing the little creature by its head and yanking. With a sickly wet pop, the basilisk rends the mammal's head from its body and scarfs it down. Tusk, teeth, bone, and fur will not be digested. Instead, they'll be coughed up at a later time. For now, our bird does not worry about such things and quickly consumes the remainder of his kill. It is not a substantial meal, and even if he were hunting for just himself, he would need to continue his search. But our basilisk is not hunting for just one, and so he is especially driven to seek greater prey. Leaving the little clearing, he makes his way through the brush to the sound and smell of fresh water. As he stalks through the bushes, the wind changes, and he picks up the scent of another theropod nearby. But more than that, picks up the scent of blood. Cautiously creeping forward, our basilisk tries to keep himself concealed as he catches his first glimpse of his potential prey. A bright red wattle hanging from his naked face and neck identifies this bird as Boulder pseudomeleagris. The red of his fleshy display is matched by the crimson on his chest and hip, where slash marks from toe claws have taken their toll. This old Tom is probably 13 or 14 years old, and was likely the dominant male of his harem before very recently being displaced. Where our basilisk mostly uses his large toe claw to restrain prey, these theropods largely use them in violent struggles for dominance with each other. Though this large theropod is less than 750 years removed from our basilisk, its kind has become almost exclusively herbivorous, rapidly gaining in size as they compete with the diversifying mammals, elasmarians, and thyreophorans for emerging niches in the Antarctic nothofagus forests. At 15.2 kilos, this old Tom, even in his wounded state, presents an almost insurmountable task for our lone basilisk. A single kick could prove lethal, and an improper mounting to try and anchor himself on its back could lead to a grapple, where the big Tom would be free to use the large claws he normally pulls down branches with to instead pull apart our basilisk. Though the wound on his leg looks fairly severe, the wounds to his chest are, unfortunately for our hunter, far more superficial. There are no broken ribs, punctured lungs, or any other organs for that matter to hasten this serpopard into death. Though the unseating of an old Tom from his harem often leads to the loser suffering grave injuries, the ones this big male sports are not so debilitating that he is in a position where he is likely to lose his life to infection or blood loss anytime soon. Our basilisk continues to watch and appraise its target as he roots around in the forest floor. The limp caused by the wound to his hip makes his steps a bit halting, causing our basilisk to lean in more intently. Bringing down a kill of this size would be a bounty, but the injuries he might suffer to make the kill could leave him unable to hunt for days, if not weeks. That's assuming he survived the encounter at all. He is not thinking in such complex terms, but he does understand how dangerous this hunt could be. Still, he continues forward. Slowly, he closes the distance, creeping forward on his long legs, before he has reached a distance close enough for him to break into a sprint and launch his attack. Just before he lunges forward, the Tom at last spots him. As our basilisk rushes in, the bigger theropod puffs out his chest and sprawls out his arms wide, his powerful hands showing off the nearly 10-centimeter long claws at the end of each of his fingers. Having lost the element of surprise, our little hunter stops short in front of the big male and backs away as the larger theropod hisses and swats at him. He may need to bring down a kill, but he will not attempt to fight an animal 3 times his size. And so he slinks away, returning to his initial quest, finding the local lake. The angry sauropod hissing and bellowing as he departs. Though any animal living in this stretch of the isthmus is never very far from water, the small freshwater lakes and ponds are always lively with visitors, as the brackish swamps and surrounding sea can't sustain most fauna. As our basilisk approaches, the sound of violence radiates from the lakeside. Peeking out of the tree line, our hunter spots the source of the noise. Several duck-like birds are screaming at each other as they try and assert dominance over this patch of beach. Smaller basal antarctolestoids, not that different from Antarctolestes, try and catch the eye of prospective mates, while a large nutria-like mammal watches as it lazily nibbles on the roots of a water lily. The 4 screaming birds are members of the species Hygrolestes gigas. Though they are reminiscent of Anseriformes, this is through convergent evolution. They have taken the semi-aquatic lifestyle of their ancestor Antarctolestes further, and in doing so have filled the niche left by the extinct flightless Anseromorphs in this stretch of Antarctica. These 4 boisterous males are all trying to make sure they dominate the prime real estate of this stretch of the shoreline. 2 already appear to be bowing out of the contest as the 2 larger males continue to squawk and scream at each other. This is the opening phase of a ritualistic battle, which may end with 1 or more of the contestants dead. Their bellows too weak, the smaller males slowly withdraw from the screaming match, not wanting to incite one of the larger males to pursue them. The largest of the 2 is an old drake looking to maintain his rule over the same stretch of lakefront he has overseen for 5 years now, and the other is a young male come to finally claim the right to breed. Though he is smaller, it is not significantly so, and it may be made up by the virility of youth and his higher testosterone levels. The old drake has seen off many foes before, a fact that is made evident by the scars on his snout. He will not back down, and neither will this young male. The challenge accepted, the 2 close the distance between each other, their necks held high in S-like curves as they prepare to strike. Our basilisk watches intently. He has witnessed clashes between drakes before, and he understands the potential this conflict represents for him. As he slowly begins to step out from the foliage, the 2 males strike. The young male is faster and grips the older drake by his snout, trying to pull him forward so that he may strike the back of his neck with his powerful claws and wings. Though their species retains the oversized toe claw of their ancestors, the weapon they use to deliver a killing blow in these tourneys is their hands. A few well-placed swats from the young male's formidable claws will rend arteries and break bone. The old male has been caught in such a grip before, and he has captured young males in it as well. Many an upstart male will panic and awkwardly try and back out of the bite, forcing themselves to lower their neck as they try and leverage free of the grip, only for the older male to bring down his claws on the back of their neck. The old drake does not retreat from the bite. Instead, he charges forward, slamming his chest into the smaller male, allowing him to use his greater mass to barrel him over. Caught off guard, the younger male attempts to maintain his hold on the older male's snout, only for the big drake to smack his foe in the shoulder. Bones crack and feathers fly as the older male uses his arms like a mace, battering his rival until the young male at last releases his snout. His face free, the old male strikes, biting at the younger male's throat and raking his teeth across it. Bloody feathers and a broken wing are not necessarily the end of this male. His species having long since given up on flight, the young drake could attempt to power through the pain and continue the fight. However, He finds himself in too much pain to continue and begins to limp away. The bloodied older male cries out in triumph as his rival backs down. With the injured male retreating, our basilisk takes his chance and launches his attack. Even exhausted and with a broken wing, deep lacerations on his neck, and several cracked ribs, the Hygrolastes represents a dangerous target. But our hunter has made his decision. In a blur, the basilisk is upon the injured drake, leaping onto his back and driving a sickle claw between his shoulder blades and forcing him to the ground before placing another foot on the injured prey's neck and pinning it. His second sickle claw meets vertebra as it punches through flesh and clamps down. Unlike with the little Pseudomericathir, where he warily avoided going in for a killing bite until it had exhausted itself, the basilisk reaches down with his jaws and begins to tear away feathers from flesh, and then rip into it in earnest. The cries and wails of the male continue for a minute more before they are at last silenced by the feasting of our hunter. He eats until he is full, and then he eats some more. He lacks the ability to bring the entire kill back home, and so he must stuff himself with a meal for those that await him. When at last he steps back from the carcass, head coated in gore, he finds a familiar enemy trotting towards him. It is not the same Sarcobelodon from earlier, this one only about half the size of the large female that he did battle with. But it eagerly moves forward as our basilisk departs from the carcass. He will not try and fight off the little mammal, he's too full of food, and there would be very little point to doing so. The chance of the carcass still having any meat worth picking at should he return from his nest is almost non-existent. So he pays the small saber-toothed weasel no mind, stretches out his wings, and awkwardly picks up speed on the open beach before launching himself into the air. He does not need to be a good flyer to make his way home. He knows the unique sights and smells that mark his nest, and when he gets close enough, he can hear the sound of 5 little chicks and a very large formal awaiting him. Gliding down to his nest, he is greeted by the chattering cries of hungry babies. His mate, an older female who he has roosted with for 3 years now, greets him by rubbing her maxilla against his dentary and letting out 3 falsetto chirps, which he responds to in kind. Their reunion is brief, as she steps out from the nest and takes flight. It is her turn to hunt, while he watches the young. The great winter that followed the impact which ended the Mesozoic is well and truly over, and spring has come to the Paleocene, marking the beginning of the struggle between the basilisk and the weasel. Hey everybody, Finn here. 700,000 years have passed since the K-Pg Extinction, and the age of fungus and ferns, which followed the impact winter, has long since passed into the annals of history. Nearly 750,000 years into the Danian, life has begun to diversify and rebound. The disaster taxon, the handful of hardy survivors who, for the first few 100,000 years, made up the bulk of life in any given area, have now slowly been displaced by new, more specialized flora and fauna, or by those that survived the extinction in refugium and could not expand greatly until the devastated world had been terraformed. The Antarctic nothofagus forests, which clung to life during the impact winter, have rebounded, and now stretch from Patagonia to Queensland. Across the Gondwanan forests, our 3 Draco-avian survivors have radiated significantly. The Sobral Formation of Seymour Island provides a glimpse into this early period of diversification. With most of the fossil record from this period coming from very fragmentary and basal remains, there's still a great deal of argumentation over specific lineages represented here. This matches the difficulty that paleontologists of our world have when identifying the greater specifics of many Paleocene mammals, like the condylars, which were once thought to be early ungulates, but are now treated as a wastebasket taxon. In the 19th century, naturalists will group the surviving Serpopardini with hippogryphoids and elasmarians in the now defunct clade Dinoelectrona, while the various families of Thanatoaves, Struthomimids, and even Ferrus-rhocids will all be grouped together in the equally defunct Carnopelagramorpha. By the time of the discovery of the Sobral, these sorts of mistakes in taxonomy will have been largely cleared up. However, while paleontologists are confident that the Sobral theropods are in fact theropods and not elasmarians or thyreophorans, greater specificity is harder to come by with many of the animals present. In today's episode, we're going to be following along with the title, The Basilisk and the Weasel, and discuss the theropods and myrtiolestids of the alternate Sobral Formation. starting out by highlighting the star of the episode, Kano-drakon, from the Greek kanos, meaning fresh or new, and the Greek drakon, well, meaning dragon. This little predator, while the largest of the carnivorous theropods known from the time, is a stem relative of the clade that will be known by future naturalists as Thanatoaves, and as such has no great descendants representing it deeper into the Paleocene and beyond. However, despite Kano-drakon not leading directly to the lineages that will dominate South America, Antarctica, and Australia, it is an important prelude of things to come. Known from a partial maxilla, a tibia, femur, humerus, and several vertebra, the exact picture of Kano-drakon is hazy and has left room for very different interpretations. The long tibia matching the femur in length has led some to argue that Kano-drakon lived an almost stork or heron-like lifestyle in the brackish swamps of the Wadillian Isthmus. However, the partial maxilla and teeth that came with it suggest something different. Like the Jurassic predator Ornitholestes, Kano-drakon's front teeth had minimal serrations and were more conical, much like you would expect from an animal that was primarily feeding on fish. However, further back into the maxilla, the teeth become more blade-like and feature much more intense serrations, indicating that while the front teeth were useful for grabbing small prey, the back teeth were used to process meals very differently from most fish-eating dinosaurs. Because of this, it's been suggested that Kano-drakon was similar to the Seriema, secretary birds, and even smaller forest rockids, a hunter of small mammals and dracoavians in the Antarctic forests, speedily running in and bringing down its oftentimes diminutive prey with powerful kicks, but not being totally unable to bring down prey in a similar size range to itself. As with many modern birds that are inaccurately reported to mate for life, these primitive basilisks were not totally monogamous. The resident male and female that we followed today have overlapping territories, making it very likely that they will continue to partner every year so long as they are not deposed by a rival. Unlike several species of later, more derived Thanatoavians, which mate for life and remain together year-round, these basilisks only stay together for about 4 months out of the year. The pair comes together just before the start of the 3-month Antarctic night. They will mate, construct a nest if they don't already have one, and lay a clutch of eggs. During the 3 months of darkness, the pair will huddle together for warmth and contribute to keeping the eggs warm, taking turns searching for food in the forest while the other mines the nest. Like most other dracoavians, Kano-drakon has reptilian-grade embryonic development, meaning the incubation time for their eggs is far longer than those of true avians. This is partially because they have teeth rather than beaks. However, in the end, this long gestation cycle works out for them. At the end of the 3 months, the eggs hatch, coinciding with the beginning of the Antarctic spring. For about a month, the male and female will continue taking turns, staying with the young and foraging for food, providing the chicks with a slurry of half-digested meat before the juveniles are at last kicked from the nest and sent off to forage for insects on their own. The male will generally depart from the nest at this point, and it's not uncommon for several of the chicks to follow him and continue to roost with him for another month or two before he finally drives them off. The next group of theropods we're going to be looking at are the Uodontognats, which make up some of the smallest but also some of the largest animals found in the Sobral. The Uodontognats diverged very rapidly from their terrestrial Antarctolestoid ancestors. We know from several mammal and bird groups that arboreal niches did not stay vacant for very long in the Paleocene, with animals like the little mammal Purgatorius appearing within 1 million years of the K-Pg. The earliest Uodontognats quickly evolved to escape the increased pressure placed upon them by other disaster taxon, by exploiting resources out of reach from their competitors. Instead of waiting for Nothofagus and monkey puzzle fruit to fall on the ground and being restricted to catching bugs in the cool morning when they're still lethargic, these early pioneers began to pilfer seeds while they were still in trees and catch insects on the wing. This was in part made possible by 2 changes to their morphology. The first of these changes was the increased curvature of the ungles in their 3rd and 4th toe compared to those of their ancestors, and the second change was the extension and functionality of their first toe. These 2 changes in their morphology allowed them to perch, and more safely and reliably feed in trees. The use and size of their first toe will go on to cause a great deal of taxonomic confusion when genetic testing in the 21st century revealed that several extant flightless New Zealand species, which had been traditionally regarded as serpopartiforms, had not had a common ancestor with the American and Australian giants in 65 million years, and were much more closely related to the ornitholemurids they shared the island with. But that's a story for another time. Near the start of the episode, you were introduced to the little red bird Austeropteryx basileus, one of 2 described species of the genus known from the formation, though there is a partial dentary of a 3rd yet-to-be-described species known to paleontologists. Initially, A. basileus and A. seymourensis were thought to be members of the same species, with one representing a more robust morph, possibly indicating sexual dimorphism. However, closer examination of the teeth revealed that this was not the case. Just as Darwin's finches showed how they had diverged from each other to tackle different food sources, so too did the teeth of Australopithecus. It used to be believed that one of the contributing factors for the survival of true birds was that their beaks uniquely allowed them to process the fruits of gymnosperms, which were still abundant on the ground even after adult trees had been annihilated by the K-Pg impact and the global forest fires which had followed. However, a 2024 paper by O'Connor et al. Identifies direct evidence of frugivory in toothed enantiornithian birds like Longopteryx. None of the early Danian Uodontignaths are as specialized in frugivory as Longopteryx, as while many do have a reduced number of teeth, they have yet to totally lose their back teeth. Both species of Ostopteryx have a reduced number of teeth for frugivory. However, while A. bacillus has more robust jaw muscles to help process nothofagus seeds, its smaller cousin, A. seymorensis, has thinner teeth to help it pluck the long nut-like seeds from monkey puzzle cones. These smaller Uodontignaths were joined by larger, more robust omnivorous members of the clade, which use their perching abilities to roost in trees, but return to the ground for mixed foraging, living a similar lifestyle to pheasants or turkeys, and allowing them to grow far larger than their fully arboreal relatives. This group is represented in the Sobral Formation by Notophoenix marimboyensis, or the southern phoenix of Marimboy Island. Weighing in at roughly 11 kilos, Notophoenix was the second largest theropod present in the formation, outweighing its hypercarnivorous cousin Caenodracon by twice the predator's body mass. Because of its size, it was not the best flyer, in many ways comparable to a modern tinamou. While these early, robust Uodontignaths would move into Australia and South America, they would be one of many animal groups which would go into terminal decline during the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, and are entirely unrelated to the modern, robust Uodontignath clades of New Zealand. The next animal, while not as mysterious in and of itself, does represent a bit of a question mark when it comes to phylogeny. Hygrolestes gigas, or the giant water thief, appears to be a very basal enceramimid, a diverse clade found east of the Wallace Line in the Indo-Australian archipelago. And therein lies the issue. The next oldest enceramimid is found in rock 25 million years younger in the Murgon fossil site of southeast Queensland. There is no evidence for them on Seymour Island in the overlying Middle Eocene Lamesta Formation or in any of the Argentinian Teopampan Age formations. Up until the discovery of Hygrolestes in the early 21st century, it was assumed that enceramimids emerged in Australia at some point in the early Eocene. Some have suggested that the answer to the question is that basal enceramimids of South America and Antarctica are victims of the inherent incompleteness of the fossil record, and they did persist in these regions for a time before eventually falling victim to pressures placed upon them by climate change and competition. Others have argued that Hygrolestes is not, in fact, an enceramimid, but instead represents an early aborted attempt by basal encercolestoids to occupy a similar niche to enceriforms, and is reflective of the general trend of these basal encercolestids to evolve a semi-aquatic lifestyle, as they will again with the superficially spinosaur-like pelargotitanids and the anhinga-like gavialamimids. Whatever its relationship to the enceramimids of Australia may be, Hygrolestes was a semi-aquatic genus which, based on its dentition, predominantly lived like gadwalls and widgeons. While fish, insects, and crustaceans were all on the menu, they predominantly fed off the soft flesh of plants like the notonuphar and Nelumbo water lilies and the Azolla water ferns. This diet would have put them in competition with the large nutria-like Gondwanathere Marimboitherium, which may have contributed to their failure to persist in the region. Our next animal's fragmentary remains and generic characteristics make identifying its position in the Serpopard phylogenetic tree difficult. Boulder pseudomeleagris was the largest theropod of the Sobral Formation, and one of the largest animals of Danian Antarctica. The large size of their denticles, as well as the strontium-calcium ratios present in their teeth, show that these theropods were omnivores that leaned heavily into herbivory. While they retained large, robust arms, they almost certainly had lost the ability to fly at this point, as their arms and claws were now better suited for hooking branches and pulling them down to feed from. Boulder, named after the Norse god who revives after Ragnarok, has been placed as a stem serpopartiform, the basal-most known serpopartiform, part of a grade of animals leading up to serpopartiform, a stem ostroserpopardid, and used to claim that serpopards are not in fact derived antarctolestoids, but rather represent a separate lineage of surviving Maniraptorans with a yet-to-be-discovered Maastrichtian ghost lineage, and also an example of convergent evolution, entirely outside of the families of serpopartiforms. As it lacks many of the later appearing diagnostic features of the clade, like use of its first toe, and it is both fairly generic and fragmentary, a clear answer may never be arrived at. However, it is indicative of the general trend that will lead to the robust and gracile sauropods that will become defining fauna in the Americas and Australia. In addition to the novel groups that were emerging, basal Antarctolestoids continued to persist, with Antarctolestes terminus persisting this deep into the Danian and being joined by A. robustus. In general, theropods were the fastest group of dracoavians to diverge significantly from their existing body plan, owing to their more generalized origin when compared to elasmarians and thyreophorans, though we'll examine them more in the next video. For now, we must move on to the Meridiolestids. In our world, the cronopioid and mesongalotoid Meridiolestids survived the K-Pg extinction event and persisted until the Miocene. Having been one of, if not the most successful groups of Mesozoic South American mammals, these derived Dryolestids never fully recovered from the extinction event and ended up being displaced by metatherians and placentals, though not before fielding the dog-sized Pelagrotherium as one of the largest non-therian mammals to have ever lived. In the world of dragons of the Cenozoic, the mesongalotoids have already matched Pelagrotherium in size, and the cronopioids have given rise to a top-order carnivore that is larger than anything they ever produced in our world, and will only keep growing and diversifying. The origins of the robust cronopioids is tied to the survival of the dracoavians and the abundance of eggs. With the total extinction of the dracoavians in western Antarctica and the devastation of many of the surviving true avian clades like the vegavids and ceramorphs, oviviry collapsed as a method of survival for small omnivorous cronopioids. This changed in the world of dragons of the Cenozoic when the three groups of dracoavians recolonized the region as they spread out of their refugium in eastern Antarctica. With the return of elasmarians, Antarctolestoids, and thyreophorans to the region came a return of oviviry. Small omnivores like Bereschisch rex were able to go from subsisting on insects and seeds to eating dragon eggs. From these emerging egg thieves derived more specialized predators, hunting the abundant number of chicks produced by these are reproduction strategists. Tusks, initially employed by cronopioids as a method of interspecific display and an aid in rooting for food, were repurposed as tools capable of swiftly severing the windpipe of small dracoavians. Bereschisch rex, or King of the Beginning, remains virtually unchanged from its pre-extinction ancestors, and isn't very different from its Cenomanian ancestor Cronopio. However, the other two cronopioids found in the Sobral have diverged significantly. Representing basal Phaconodonta is the largest predator of the Sobral, Sarcobelodon imperator. At between 7 and 8 kilos, this small carnivore was dwarfed by the largest mammalian and dracoavian herbivores of the area, but it was in the perfect size range to bring down small and juvenile prey. The most prominent feature of Sarcobelodon's dentition is its tusks turned saber teeth, which contributed to its name, and they are certainly impressive, being proportionately among the largest of any of the saber-toothed Phaconodonts. However, despite the impressiveness of these teeth, it is the carnassial-like triconodont teeth which will quickly define the Phaconodonts as hypercarnivores. Like its Maastrichtian ancestor, Ostroconodon, Sarcobelodon has shearing triconodont molars, similar to those of the Eutriconodonta, though they are analogous and not homologous in origin, as more basal Dryolestids lack these dental features. Living a bit like a stoat, Sarcobelodon is still capable of some degree of arboreality, but primarily spends most of its time on or under the ground. Lacking retractable claws, this predator instead had claws that were large in proportion to their digits, aiding in burrowing either for their own underground nests or invading the nests of dracoavians. As with all Meridiolestids, Sarcobelodon had an epipubic bone, which required the birth of small fetal-like offspring, which would spend time developing in their mother's pouch outside of the womb. This was a contributing factor for 19th century naturalists, lumping Meridiolestids, Metatherians, and marsupials into a single clade until genetic testing revealed that while Metatherians are closely related to true marsupials, Meridiolestids were significantly more basal to Cladotheria. This would result in the group being dubbed Pseudotheria, though for convenience purposes we'll still be just calling them Meridiolestids. The other derived branch of cronopioids represented in the Sobral is Pseudodidelphia. While the Phaconodonts would not survive into the modern era, Pseudodidelphia persists in Australia, with some modern genre looking very similar to their Danian ancestor, Microcleftes smilodon, or the scalpel-toothed little brigand. Unlike Sarcobelodon, Microcleftes has shorter, curved ungles, indicative of an arboreal lifestyle. And while it almost certainly ate eggs and baby dracoavians, its omnivorous diet mostly consisted of insects and plants. The third group of meridiolestids to make it into the Paleocene were the mesongalotoids. Unlike the smaller cranopioids, this group had low and rounded bundant teeth for general herbivorous and omnivorous feeding. Looking very similar to Pelargotherium, Hohentherium taylorii was the second largest mammal of the Sobral and the largest of the meridiolestids. Unlike the high-crowned hypsodont teeth of the Gondwanatheres that it lived alongside, the low and rounded teeth of Hohentherium were more suitable for crushing, allowing them to process cones, seeds, roots, tubers, and, on occasion, carcasses. It is speculated that this diet placed mesongalotoids in greater competition with elasmarians, which created a size arms race between the groups and contributed to the rise of early Paleocene megafauna in Patagonia and Antarctica, which appears to have lagged behind fauna in the northern hemisphere in our world. With its very generalized appearance, Hohentherium lacks the retracted nasal bones of younger, more derived Australian clades of trunked mesongalotoids. In addition, it still retained claw-like toes for digging, indicating that it still lived a semi-fossorial lifestyle. As an adult and weighing between 14 and 17 kilos, Hohentherium would have been all but immune to predation from any of the known predators of the Sobral. It likely would have been capable of intimidating even the largest Sarcobelodon and Caenodracon off of a kill, and possibly even opportunistically hunting elasmarian chicks. Owing to the spottiness of the fossil record, there's unfortunately no information we can gain from the Sobral on the monotremes of Antarctica. But in the next video, we'll look at the other great clade of Antarctic mammals, the Gondwanatheres, and their Draco-avian counterparts, the elasmarians and thyreophorans. Before that video, I'd like to do another Q&A video. Questions about the theropods and meridiolestids of the formation will get priority. But if you've got any other general questions, I'll be happy to answer them as well. Oh, and before I go, I want to thank Netchman Reverie on Twitter for the incredible art I commissioned of the two-dueling male Hoplophosphorus. As someone who isn't really an artist, it's amazing to see my animals brought to life by someone who is. Until next time, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.